Let's begin. This webinar is on Carnot Batteries, facilitating the transition from fossil fuel generation to renewable generation. And we have two very expert speakers to take us through this. We have Michael Geyer from DLR, which is the German Aerospace Center, and Sebastian Freund from Malta Inc. And when they do their presentation, which is a joint presentation, they'll say some more words of introduction of themselves. We encourage everybody to send questions in while Michael and Sebastian are speaking. Please use the Q&A box. You'll see a question and answer icon somewhere on your screen. Please use that for sending in the questions. And let me now hand over to Michael, who will start the presentation. The presentation will last about 20 or 25 minutes. After that, there'll be discussion of the questions that all of you have sent in. And just to note that after the webinar, maybe days after, you will all get a recording of the webinar and a copy of the PowerPoint that's used. Michael, please go ahead, say a few words of introduction of yourself and go ahead with the presentation.
Yes, hello, my name is Michael Geyer, and many of you already know me. I have passed my last almost 30 professional years with concentrating solar power. And mostly I have been specialized in the storage systems for concentrating solar power. And I think, let's say, we have been so successful with these technologies that today we are at a point where we also can bring the benefits of this to the places where we don't have so much sunshine. And therefore, to help these places to get from the coal age to the store age. And today, I want to show you how these storage systems from the, wait a second. I'm getting here. I need to share, compartment. Yeah, I have to. You see my screen, Jonathan?
Yes, we can see it, but it needs to be in presentation mode, I think, but okay. We can see it.
Yeah, I just need to, okay, now just. So, yeah. We have chosen a sophisticated name for these storage systems. We call them Carnot Batteries. And why is this so? I have realized, let's say, in the last worldwide international events that now the world, when getting from the fossil age to the renewable age, they all claim now will come all the age of the batteries, and they are only thinking of the electrochemical batteries, the lithium ion, which you have all in your smartphones. But they are not really aware that most of the batteries that most of the storage that has been installed worldwide, which is not pumped hydro storage, have actually been the large thermal storage systems of the concentrating solar power plants. And there, I will show you in a minute a slide of how many are installed worldwide. And basically, we come here that we have a battery, but that is not charged with electricity, but that was charged by direct sunshine, which heats here a storage fluid, which is the molten salt, and that is put into a tank. And then from this tank, the molten salt is passed through a steam generator, and this steam generator drives a turbine and makes electricity. This is what you all know. And now when you ask what is now the Carnot battery and how can you use this in countries where basically there is not that much sunshine, then the simple thing to do is instead of heating this molten salt with the mirrors and with the concentrated sunshine, you can also heat it with an electrical heater. And by this process, you convert power to heat, and then you store this heat. And then when you want to discharge it, you take this heat from the storage, you pass it here through a conversion cycle, and then you convert it to power again. Now you will ask me, what is the advantage of all this? I think the advantage of all this is, first of all, if there are bankers among you, they will say, well, with these batteries, the electrochemical, the lithium-ion batteries, there's practically no experience, no large-scale experience, while with these molten salt tanks, we have now over 10 years experience worldwide, and they have shown that they are operating in large commercial sizes up to 250 megawatts electric for 6 hours, and that they can have a lifetime of up to 35 years, which basically for the electrochemical batteries is still a dream to come. So if you look here to this graph and you see the world storage capacity in megawatts by 2017, you basically see, yeah, we have 170 gigawatt worldwide. And then we have this big blue bar, and this big blue bar is just pumped hydro storage. And then if you look to the right, you see that what is not pumped hydro storage, there you see over half of this is yellow. And that is not batteries. This is the thermal storage in the CSP plants. And then you see the green thing that is batteries. And the orange thing is electromechanical. So as of today, if you talk of electricity storage worldwide, over half of it is what is called here thermal storage. And electricity basically is stored in molten salt tanks as heat and then reconverted to electricity. And here you see that there is still many new gigawatt hours to come. And I will show you, let's say, where the biggest are and what is, let's say, the benefit for this also for countries which don't have so much sunshine. So if we look at the role of what here I call the Carnot batteries, these are in the range of several hundred megawatts, and they provide hourly multi-hour storage. So they are ideal for load shifting, and they are also ideal if you have, let's say, during the day, peaks of solar power, not only by the concentrated solar power, but also by PV, you can store this PV electricity by heat in these Carnot batteries, in these thermal storage tanks, and you can then discharge them if you have peaks at night. So here is I'm sitting here in currently in this beautiful country. Basically, you see there the Almeria. So basically, I'm currently sitting here, and actually there is a cloud over my house. The important thing, what you see is that is probably the country that has installed most megawatt hours of this thermal storage, 6,500 megawatt hours, and many of them are running for over for now up to 10 years. So just to give you an impression, the largest thermal storage worldwide up to date has been built at the Solana plant by Abengoa in the United States, and that is a molten salt storage system with a capacity of 200 megawatt electric over 6 hours. So far, this has been the largest system, but I will tell you there is much more to come. Here you see basically that is the close-up of how such a storage system is looking like. And now what is more important, these systems, they have worked up to 400 degrees centigrade in highest storage temperature. But if we want to use this, let's say, as a high efficient Carnot battery, we want to increase the efficiency of the reconversion cycle. And for this, we want to have higher temperatures. And so today there are storage systems which already are operated at 565 degrees centigrade. The first of them has been the 20 megawatt system of Gema Solar, built by Sener in 2011, so it's already operating 8 years. And now a 150 megawatt 6-hour system has been put into operation at the North 3 plant in Aqua, in Morocco. So this is how this would look like. And if there are people here from coal plants and conventional plants, have a good look, because this may be the kind of equipment you would like to add to your plant. And now let's say the biggest storage system is coming here in Dubai. That is a project that has been developed and by Aqua and been awarded by Aqua, and Aqua has selected as EPC contractor Shanghai Electric, and Shanghai Electric has selected as its solar thermal technologist Abengoa. And here the interesting thing is, this is a 700 megawatt concentrating solar project, and it has a 12-hour storage. It will use the world's largest salt amounts. I think it is around 560,000 tons of salt, and it will store 700 megawatts for 12 hours of electricity. So that if we hear today storage is still to be developed, storage needs to be qualified. I mean, here with this technology, we can store gigawatt hours and for a designed lifetime of some 35 years. So the interesting thing here is that if you mix this storage with the PV, then you get the cheapest dispatchable solar electricity in the world. You can have 24 hours at some 5 US cents the kilowatt hour. And everybody who is living, let's say, under clouds will ask, okay, but what good does this to me? And here I then come to my other background. I'm a German living in Spain, but this is here a picture not of South Africa. That is not a picture of any open mining in Australia. This is a picture of Germany with open mining lignite coal close to Cologne. And here you see this enormous operations of extracting the coal and bringing it directly to the German power plants. Now, you may have read that it's not 4 weeks ago that there was something which is called the German Coal Commission, and the German Coal Commission is a commission that is constituted by all basically social stakeholders, politicians, unions, industry, etc. And they have made a publication and a recommendation that Germany would gradually step out from its coal power generation by 2038. Today, there are 46 gigawatts of coal plants. 7 gigawatts will be shut down by 2022. A total of 23 gigawatts, half of it should be shut down by 2030, and the remaining would be shut down by 2038. Now, at the same time, Germany will shut down the nuclear plants. And so the big question is, will Germany then still have light and cold beer in the evening? And here, basically, all this shall be substituted by renewables. In 2018, Germany already had 38% of its gross electricity production produced by renewables. That is not the share of the power, it's the share of the annual production. And the objective of the government program is to reach 65% of renewable share of the production in 2030 and 85% by 2050. Now you can imagine that also in Germany, the wind is not blowing with German discipline 24 hours, 8,760 hours a year, and less the sun is shining not even every day. So this means that these 65% or if 85% are highly variable load. And if, let's say, you want to shut down the fossil plants and you want to shut down and minimize the carbon emissions, this means that you will need lots of storage to convert this variable electricity production into a dispatchable electricity production that will supply the electricity when the demand is needed. So basically, therefore, here at the DLR in Germany, we are studying with a large German utility the possibility of converting existing coal plants into storage plants, so giving coal plants a second green life by adding a storage system to them. And that is where we can bank on these now over 10 years of experience of concentrating solar power. That is where we can expand the solar power technologies to the cloudy countries by just adding this molten salt thermal storage to the, for example, German coal plants and use it in the following way. Today, you see, you have in this graph, you have here the variable plants, and you have the thermal plants. The thermal plants are here operated by coal, biomass, etc. And so in future, the idea is to eliminate the coal and here to add thermal storage, what I call the Carnot battery. And this thermal storage is charged with electricity from the grid. And then it will deliver its heat to the existing plants. And there it will be converted in the existing cycles. Now, what is the advantage of this? The advantage of this is these plants are there. They exist. They have a grid connection. They have permits. They have people who operate them. And so this means this is much easier to convert than, let's say, to build in Germany a plant like Dubai is doing, a 700 megawatt plant, greenfield, is, let's say, in a country like Germany, very time consuming. We'll need 10 years in permits, etc. And so this is an ideal solution. So the question is, how can you convert a coal plant into a storage plant? So we start here with an existing coal plant. And this has here the thermodynamic cycle. It's the coal boiler. With the coal boiler, you produce high pressure steam, goes into the turbine. The turbine moves the generator, and the generator makes electricity. And then here this goes back and closes the cycle. And so how can you convert this into a storage plant? What you do is you add this part, you know perfectly from the concentrating solar power plants. This is a hot tank with molten salt at a temperature of 565 degrees. This is a cold tank at 270 degrees. And then here, this is the part which is known from the concentrating solar power, that is the molten salt steam generators. You come in here with the feed water, you preheat, you evaporate, you superheat. You then mix this with the existing steam from the coal boiler, and you run through the existing turbine, and you produce the electricity. Then you reheat it and get it again into the turbine, and you mix it with the existing thing. Now, the new part here is that you do not have mirrors here in the lack of sunshine, but that you have electrical resistance heaters, which you heat with the excess or curtailed, otherwise curtailed renewable electricity from the German grid. And in such a system, I mean, let's say here efficiency would be 95%, this would be 42%. So you would have a reconversion efficiency of 40%. Now everybody will cry, oh, 40% efficiency, you throw away 60% of valuable electricity. I think there is a paradigm change in renewables, because if you had to burn fossil fuel and produce CO2 emissions to generate this electricity, then yeah, it would be a waste of fuel and emissions. But with renewables, you today have many times curtailed renewables, like in China. I think in the wind in north, they have 42%, which is curtailed. And let's say in future, they get so cheap that here it is just a matter whether it is cost efficient, but efficiency itself is not, let's say, the driving parameters, it's the cost, and it is the decarbonization. So this is something which DLR and a large German utility is going to test and to demonstrate and to explore here the next years to implement this into an existing lignite coal plant and to demonstrate that this is working and that this is a viable solution to give coal plants a second life. But of course, technology doesn't stop here, because basically all of us who are engineers, physicists, etc., we don't like here this electric heater, and we think, can't we improve the efficiency by doing something better? Of course we can, and the word here is called heat pump. So basically, but this does not exist today. This needs to be developed. This is underdeveloped. So instead of using the teapot heater, the resistance heater, you use here a heat pump. And by this, you have a coefficient of performance, which can be like 120%. And by this, you can increase your round trip efficiency to 50%. And then there is, let's say, if you use also the heat pump for discharging, then you would not use here the steam cycle anymore. Then you can just say, let us also put a heat pump, heat engine here for the reconversion. And then you can reach over 60% or close to 70% efficiency, round trip, charging, discharging, which starts to get pretty close to what lithium-ion battery do or other electrochemical batteries. But here you have the big advantage, first of all, that you can do this in many 100 megawatts for many hours, and with a lifetime, these systems are designed for 35 years. So I think in future, this is something where probably the ideal storage system would have for the short-term grid frequency control from the 15 milliseconds to, let's say, the 30 minutes, their batteries are unbeatable. But if you have to store for a longer time, then probably these kind of systems, which I call Carnot batteries, will become more cost efficient. And therefore, here we wanted to take the opportunity of this seminar to bring these battery systems, these Carnot battery systems, on the screen of attention and show that these are a viable solution. Now, you think all this is science fiction, but Sebastian will just show you that here this is very close to reality. And so I will now pass to Sebastian the word. Oh, we got that. Huh? Ah, here, and exactly. So Sebastian, you now can tell our audience that this is not science fiction, but that we are just about of having these Carnot batteries for the beginning of the storage.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Hello, everybody. I'm Sebastian Freund from Malta Inc., a startup company that is here to develop the technology for Carnot batteries and commercialize them. I'm responsible for thermodynamics and plant design, and I'm calling in from Cambridge in Massachusetts. So the idea of Malta is to have a giant thermal or Carnot battery storing electricity as heat, as Michael has shown before. And together we will now look inside this battery, and I'll explain how it works. So first, we have a heat pump to charge the battery that takes electricity off the grid to drive a compressor that pumps the heat from a cold reservoir here to a hot reservoir of molten salt. The unique features of this include that the working fluid in this heat pump cycle is air. We have heat exchangers and leakage storage, a coolant on the cold side, and molten salt, like in solar plants, on the hot side. And after storing the heat in hot molten salt and in cold coolant, you can reverse this cycle. We call it the discharge or generation cycle, to generate electricity again out of that heat by means of a gas turbine cycle. You use the cold air in the compressor of the gas turbine cooled by the coolant, then heat the air with the hot molten salt to generate an amount of electricity with the gas turbine that is the equivalent to the amount of electricity that came in to drive the heat pump, reduced by the efficiency. Now, on paper, this looks simple enough, right? So why has this not been built before? Why has nobody come and said, okay, simple thermodynamic cycle, I'll build it? The reason is that there are some new components that you cannot buy and that are very challenging to make. And these include custom turbo machinery, right? The hot compressor for the heat pump and the gas turbine for generation. That is nothing you can buy off the shelf. You need for the cold storage an affordable coolant fluid in large quantities. And most importantly, you need very large heat exchangers at very low cost with very low temperature differences to make this efficient. The startup company Malta in Cambridge thinks that together with our partners, we can take on these challenges and build these missing components and demonstrate that as a prototype. So for those of you who studied thermodynamics, here's a TS diagram of the cycle that proves how it works and that it can work in theory. The entropy increases always, which is good. Waste heat is discharged eventually. The blue is the generation cycle and the red is the heat pump cycle, starting here with the compressor. And as you see, the temperatures are very, very close. The hot temperature of the molten salt heated by the heat pump is just a little bit higher than the hot temperature of the air that goes into the turbine of the generation cycle. On the right, we see an artist's rendering of the principle of the plant and how the coolant and the salt tanks are filled, while in the middle here, the heat exchangers surrounding the turbo machinery, exchanging heat with the air cycle and an air storage reservoir here to keep the pressure, and then a cooling tower down here to discharge the waste heat. So large, inexpensive heat exchangers really are key to this technology. And we selected mini channel heat exchangers. They have been developed by a contractor in the past, and they have been tested as shown here in a very small scale. And we're now working closely with an OEM, very large OEM, to scale these heat exchangers and the production method to the size required for a prototype. Similarly, the turbo machinery has been developed by a contractor in CAD. We're working now with an OEM to scale the turbo machinery to a size of about 10 megawatts for a pilot. and expecting to build that in the coming 3 years. The turbo machinery then looks approximately similar to gas turbine, both the heat pump and the generation machines. Finally, plant design. Malta envisions that we start out with a small plant of 10 megawatt, a prototype followed by a pilot. And then after gaining some experience with the design and operations, proving it out, making it bankable, we envision that we quickly grow to utility-sized plants of 100 megawatt or more, using the same technology, but obviously larger components. These are images here developed in CAD by a contractor. We're working, of course, on the control concepts, steady and transient simulation with models, and we have just kicked off a feed study and detailed engineering with an EPC partner. And with that, I'd like to conclude and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, both Michael and Sebastian. Excellent presentation. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. In fact, I can see quite a few questions have already come in through the Q&A box. So let me just remind people, or in fact, I've seen a lot of participants have joined since the beginning of the webinar. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. On the other hand, if you want to introduce yourself and to say where you're from and haven't done so already, please put that in the chat box. So questions in the Q&A box. Michael, I think you've maybe switched off. Yes, you're back. Okay. So let's go to the questions. I have one question that maybe captures some of the questions that have come in through the Q&A box. Let me put it this way. On some of your slides, you referred to proof of concept of this type of storage, particularly this type of storage in its application to repowering coal-fired power plants without the coal. So when you say proof of concept, can you summarize for us briefly how much of the technical aspects of this still need to be proved? How much of the technical concept still needs to be proved? And how much of the economic aspects of the concept still need to be proved? Because I'm seeing some questions that are coming in that are more about the technical side, and other questions that are coming in that are more about the economic side. So I don't know which of you would like to respond first, Michael, and maybe then Sebastian.
Yeah, maybe I take this one. If you just go to the system where you, which I showed first, where you connect where you retrofit an existing coal plant with a molten salt storage, there is no, let's say, proof of technical concept necessary. Well, let's say what is completely proven is the molten salt system, which is with its balance of plant and with its molten salt heat exchangers. What is proven in small scale is the resistance heaters that heat up the salt up to the 565 degrees. So this is technical, I would say it's conventional technology. You can build it, but let's say nowhere has a 200 or 100 to 200 megawatt electric resistance heater built in practicality. So basically this is using a proven technology, but getting, let's say, learning its use in this scale. And then, of course, let's say for the people in the coal plant, what needs to be proven is they never have. I mean, coal plants so far ran a base load some 6,000 hours per year. They did not need to start and stop daily. And so basically, I think it is more to get acquainted with this technology, to integrate it in the plant than a technical proof of concept, because the molten salt storage with steam cycle, as I said, is running and proven now for over almost 10 years in utility scale.
Sebastian, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, maybe I can only add that for the system that includes a heat pump, the concept is there. Of course, heat pumps have been built, but not at this temperature, not at this size. So I can say that it works quite well in detailed engineering and detailed simulations, but of course it hasn't been built yet. The heat exchanges are also challenging, at least for the Malta system, where you don't use conventional shell and tube heat exchangers, which are bulky and expensive enough. So there are lots of technical challenges. I think they can be overcome, but they remain big challenges, engineering-wise and economically, of course, as well.
Okay, I mean, thank you both for those responses, very clear responses. Let me ask you a question on the economics. What you're saying really, I think, is that you can use this system to replace the coal in coal-fired power plants, and it will obviously be cleaner than coal-fired power, assuming that the electricity, if there's electricity as input, is on average cleaner than coal, which is very likely to be. But are you saying that right now in some countries this would be as cheap or cheaper than coal, or that it might be sometime in the foreseeable future? Which are you saying? Could it be cheaper than coal now, or are you thinking of this for some time in the future?
Well, I mean, this depends on the country. For example, I have received calls, and I will go next week to Chile. And in Chile, I have received calls from a large Chile utility that is running, I think, 5,000 megawatts of coal. And you may remember that Chile has technology, let's say, agnostic tenders for power purchase agreement, where they say we want the next 20 years, I don't remember whether it's 20 or 30 years, so many gigawatt hours at these and these times. And those coal plants, I think they still got PPAs, which were $70, $80 per megawatt hour. And in the last tenders, PV plants, they got down to $20, $30 per megawatt hour. So that I think today, PPAs have been canceled or are about being canceled for these $80, even paying the penalties and going then for the PV. Now, this is all fine, but also the Chileans need electricity at night. So where do you store this? And then I think in the end, the economic analysis is it cheaper to put, and bankable to put lithium-ion batteries to the PV plants? Or is it cheaper that if I have an amortized coal plant that has basically, is basically amortized, and I add a molten salt storage to it, can I then offer cheaper storage services? Because what is electricity storage? At the end, it's a box where you put electricity in and you get electricity out, and the guy who needs storage, he doesn't care what the box says in it, he only cares about the cost. So in the end, this is an economic analysis, case by case, what is the cheapest electricity storage solution? And as I gave you the example of Chile, that is cheaper. If you take Germany, there is another thing. In Germany, the question is not what is cheaper. In Germany, there is the political decision of decarbonization and that you get out of coal, and then I mean, you can get coal for free. The only thing is that you cannot use it. And so the question whether it's cheaper or not is not a question for the future.
Okay, then let me ask you a follow-on question, which again captures some of the questions in the Q&A box. From what you know, and you've worked all over the world, So you have a lot of familiarity with a lot of countries, including probably most of the countries from which we have participants on this webinar. If you had to say, what are the 5 or 10 countries in the world that you think should be looking at this type of technology as a solution for their phase out of coal over some period of time, coal or lignite, knowing that when you're phasing out coal as a government, one of your biggest concerns is, well, what about the jobs of people working in the coal sector? Because often those are towns or cities that are very dependent on this one source of employment and so on. And I think with the technology option you're looking at, what you're proposing, you can at least save jobs in the coal plant, if not in the coal mine, and that can make quite a substantial difference. So what are the countries that come immediately to mind? I mean, you've mentioned Chile, you've mentioned Germany, based on different considerations. So basing it on both the economics and policy considerations, where a country has said for particular environmental reasons or whatever, it wants to phase out coal or it wants to do it economically and so on. What are the countries where you would say they should really be looking at this technology option as a way of phasing out coal but preserving jobs, and if they care, reducing emissions, that should be looking at this that are not yet looking at it?
Well, I think, first of all, you should look at countries that have, if they phase out coal, that they already have some renewable energy to let's say, charge the storage. So basically, you need to look at countries who have already a significant installed capacity of renewables. Then just that, which jumps to my mind is countries like South Africa, who have lots of coal plants and who have now started lots of renewable plants. And they are already, let's say, starting to suffer something like the duck curve. Probably countries like China, who have, as I told you, they have lots of wind plants with very high percentage of curtailment. Then, yeah, in the US is probably more difficult. I think they have the coal plants and they have the demand curves, and they urgently need storage. And then if you look to Europe, probably when we go from, let's say, to a greener energy supply, we can start here. We can start here in Spain, where they are closing down coal plants, probably Italy, Greece, etc. But also then in Eastern European countries. But I don't want to limit this to the coal plants, because let's say now there will be hundreds of megawatts of new renewables installed. And where you don't have real high radiation, there will be more PV installed. And I think with every wind and PV plant where you are considering to put a lithium-ion battery, you should make an economic analysis, whether in your case it wouldn't be more competitive and economic to put this kind of Carnot batteries, to put these kind of molten salt storages.
Yeah, I think, no, thank you. That's very good. So for the coal, you mentioned South Africa, China, the US, Germany, Spain, Greece, Italy, and various Eastern European countries, and there may well be others that you would think of.
You should add Australia, probably India.
Okay. But you're also making an additional point that simply as a form of electricity storage, independently of coal or any other thermal plant, I think what you're saying is that thermal storage is so cheap that once electricity from PV or wind passes a certain point, gets particularly cheap, then it can make sense to take whatever conversion losses there are economically it can make sense to use thermal storage to store PV electricity on a large scale and for many hours, instead of thinking about large lithium-ion batteries and so on, other forms of electrochemical batteries that have become very popular but may not be as cheap. I think that's a really important point, that that process is evolving rapidly. I don't know if you've had a chance, either Sebastian or Michael, to look at the now 55 questions in the Q&A box. Some of them I've already asked in one form or another. But
yeah, I saw one question, and the question was that if this salt has any environmental, let's say, risk. The beautiful thing of the molten salt systems are they use concrete, they use steel, and this molten salt is just a fertilizer. If there's a leak in the tanks, I mean, it spills to the soil, but it doesn't penetrate it, it freezes, and you can then even use it as a fertilizer. And the other thing is it has a lifetime of 35 years or more, so that basically you don't have the problemacy of recycling this, etc., like you would have with electrochemical batteries.
Right. Thank you. That's important to know. Sebastian, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the Q&A box and whether there are particular questions you would like to respond to.
Yeah, I'm looking through it right now. It's a lot of questions. A few technical ones that I could maybe answer quickly. So the salt doesn't freeze. Of course, we want to always keep it molten, right? In both tanks, the hot molten salt tank and the warm molten salt tank at about 280 Celsius. It's not a phase change material. And over the course of the development of the Carnot battery with Malta Inc. and its predecessors, we have looked at all sorts of storage options, including packed beds and whatnot. And it appeared that the molten salt on the hot side was the most economical way, even with the heat exchangers. Because when you store for many hours, 8, 10, 20, whatever, the cost of your tanks becomes a smaller and smaller fraction of the overall, right? And the cost of salt is relatively low per kilowatt hour stored. It's almost an order of magnitude below what batteries are typically.
Mm-hmm. Just to give you some numbers, basically, if you just look to the only to the molten salt system, the capacity, the kilowatt hour in large systems, hundreds of megawatts, is well below $50 per megawatt hour. Per kilowatt hour, the capex, and then you need to add to this, of course, the turbine cycle, etc. But the cost objective of this is that this is well below the $80 per kilowatt hour. I think the objective of lithium-ion batteries is like to approach the $100 per kilowatt hour, but if you buy today these systems, you still pay like $300 the kilowatt hour in larger systems. That is, I think, the commercial. These are the cost targets. Now, the other thing is there was a question, of course, what is important, and that has become now also a social question in Germany, that there are lots of jobs here in the power plants and in the coal mining, etc. And so converting these coal plants into storage plants will conserve quite an amount of those jobs because the plant will still be run, let's say, as a thermal plant, basically with the same skills. So that this is also, let's say, a social cushion when you do the transition from the coal to the renewable scenarios. Now, there was another question, and this is whether this would also help nuclear plants. And there is one point which I didn't mention yet, and that is what is most important for, let's say, all big power plants is that to increase their flexibility in operation. So far, I think coal plants and nuclear plants have it difficult to go below a minimum load of, I don't know, 40%, and people will jump, no, my plant can go lower, but others will go higher. But the trick here with the storage is that if there's, for example, a big wind bust here in Germany, and suddenly, let's say, all the either the wind mills are curtailed or other plants must go off. What you can do here is that these plants can use, instead of shutting down the coal plant or even a nuclear plant, could use its own electricity to store this storage, and then it could then, let's say, reconvert this at times when then the demand is higher. Now, this is, if again, it's always a case-by-case calculation. Because, of course, if you feed the storage with your own electricity, then you have this efficiency loss. But you also have high efficiency losses if you stop it and if you do a cold start, etc. So here, the storage may flexibilize the operation capabilities of these basically baseload coal plants, and even one could look into flexibilizing a nuclear plant. And finally, there's one point to add which has not been mentioned at all, and that is, let's say, the advantage of the thermal storage system is if you have a long dark period or a long wind still period, when, let's say, battery storages, etc., or pumped hydro storages, they are empty. Here you still can put a small backup boiler that, for example, a gas-fired backup boiler that then in these cases can heat your salt with gas, and you can have for these little remaining periods 100% dispatchability without having to maintain these megawatts of reserve capacity in another place. So this is, let's say, the absolute strength that practically these thermal storage systems have 100% dispatchability if you add to them a small backup that is just used in the, let's say, in these last minimum hours where you have the unexpected and unpredicted wind stillness or no sun. So this is another advantage.
Okay. Now that's very interesting. It's very helpful. Let me ask you about Germany. What can you tell us about how Germany or how the authorities in Germany are thinking about this technology right now? What kind of contribution it may play to the phase out of coal that has been, I'm not sure if it's been announced or recommended by the Coal Commission, but anyway, to the phase out of coal. What are the plans or the ideas in Germany for using this technology? That's one question. And then a related question is, are there other countries that are currently at some stage of thinking about using this technology as part of their coal phase out?
Well, I think there are 3 points. The first point is that the phase out of the coal and the energy transition to increase by 2030 the renewable share to 65%, that is part of the current government program. And the current government is not a right or left, but is a broad coalition between right and left. So represents very a stable majority in going ahead. So I think even if the government changes, etc., there will no questioning that to continue on this path of which is called the energy transition. Now, secondly, in the current governmental program, there is in the energy policy a clause, a governmental clause that says we want to explore the possibility of converting German coal plants into storage plants. So that is already government program. And so they now put money to the words, and therefore we expect to see that there will be government support to these first demonstration plants. Thirdly, the technology itself, which was first introduced in the Andasol 1 plant in Spain, has already, and that was in the year, the development was in the early 2000s, that already had been supported by the German Ministry at that time for Research and Technology with German funds. They supported the development of molten salt and CSP plants. And so basically they are open to use this in the coal plants, and we are receiving high-level support up to the Minister for Economy in Berlin, the Federal Minister, and the Minister for Economy in North Rhine-Westphalia in supporting, let's say, this demonstration, and in supporting the idea of converting the German coal plants into storage plants, because it resolves, if you want to shut them down, it resolves an enormous social problem.
Okay, so there's a question in the Q&A box, a very specific question of, are there owners of coal-fired power plants? So let's put Germany to one side for the moment. Are there owners of coal-fired power plants that are already looking at this technology, whether they're privately owned plants or they're part of a state-owned utility? Are there examples already outside of Germany of people looking at this? Are there examples yet of that?
Well, I think, let's say, with the publications we are doing of this pilot test in Germany, there are, let's say, coming more and more inquiries and invitations to do some kind of joint study. I am not aware that this, let's say, has progressed, but I think this is initiating, and anybody who's interested I welcome him, let's say, to contact me and to see if here from DLR we can establish some kind of cooperation and look into the potential of his plant.
Sebastian, did you want to add something to that, or?
No, I think that was pretty conclusive.
Okay. Well, we've reached the time limit. It's a great pity, actually, because I'm sure we could discuss a lot more, and the Q&A box is still filling up. So what I would suggest is, if you are prepared to let people email you with questions, that you share your email address. Maybe ATA Insights would be able to organize a further webinar or an interview process. I think that they'll need to decide that, because clearly this is a topic that is generating a huge amount of interest. ATA will in any case share a recording of this webinar and the presentation, and the presentation, of course, can include your email addresses. So if people want to follow up with very specific questions to you, I hope you're available and willing to respond to some of those questions. My guess is that some representatives of countries listening in on this webinar or who watch it later will be thinking about whether they could use some very specific advice on how to do this in their country, or at least how to examine the option of doing this, because in a way it's a dream. I mean, assuming that the economics works well, you save jobs, you cut emissions, and in contrast to a more sort of dramatic vision where if you phase out coal, you lose all the jobs, you lose all the infrastructure, all the power plants, all the assets. It's all gone, which of course makes it politically and socially pretty difficult in many countries. I myself come from the UK, and I'm old enough to remember the time when closing down the coal industry was a huge political battle and an often violent one, and it creates social divisions that can last for a very long time. In some ways, they're still there in the UK. So let me close the session on that point. I think we could keep going for hours, but I have to close it. Extremely interesting presentations. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you to ATA Insights for organizing the webinar. So thank you to everybody for the participation, and goodbye.
Thank you.